Michael Tellinger, a scientist and explorer, he's become a real-life Indiana Jones, making groundbreaking discoveries about ancient civilizations at the southern tip of Africa. His continued efforts and analytical, scientific approach have produced stunning new evidence that will force us to rethink the origins of man and rewrite the history books. Michael is also a prolific writer, authoring and co-authoring several bestsellers. Among them, Adam's Calendar, Discovering the Oldest Man-Made Structure on Earth, Slave Species of God, Temples of the African Gods, Slave Species of the Gods, The Secret History of the Annunaki and Their Mission on Earth, and to be released next month, May 25th, 2013, African Temples of the Anunnaki, The Lost Technologies of the Gold Mines of Enki. Looking forward to that. With that, here he is from the African subcontinent, Michael Tellinger. Welcome. Great to have you with us.
Lovely to be talking to you, Michael.
How you doing?
Yeah, very well. It's 10 o'clock at night here, so I've been looking forward to our chat. Normally I do these late at night, early in the morning, so this is a nice, fresh change.
I'm glad we were able to make it convenient for you. I know it's kind of tough being on the other side of the planet. But isn't this amazing? Yeah. We have this technology that we're able to do this now. It's extraordinary.
Well, it's really the technology that is allowing us to speed up this age of enlightenment, isn't it?
It certainly is. What have you been up to recently, Michael?
Well, I've just been finishing my new book on contributionism, as I call it. The book is called Ubuntu Contributionism, Blueprint for a New Social Structure, A World Without Money, which is really the information and the conclusions that I've reached after, the discoveries that we've made here in South Africa regarding the ancient civilizations, and as you mentioned, the vanished, the remains of the Enki's gold mining empire, and the presence of the Anunnaki, and this huge body of evidence that has been lying buried beneath the soil that has suddenly jumped out and smacked us in the face and said, here it is, here we are. And what I've learned from the past 5 years of research, together with, the previous 25 years or so, or more, 30 years of looking at the origins of humankind and delving into the real depths of that, I guess starting probably with Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods in 1978. That has led me to formulate a whole new understanding of how the ancient civilizations lived, what they did, how they were manipulated and controlled. But the very important thing conclusion that I reached was that they did all this without any money. And that made me really think about how we today as a society are controlled and manipulated absolutely by money, and realize that that is the biggest problem that we have. So the new book is really, I guess, a prototype for what I believe to be a new social structure, and a blueprint presenting some very basic ideas and suggestions as to what we should be doing to remove ourselves and free ourselves from the economic slavery that we find ourselves in.
The idea of Ubuntu, that is so fascinating to me. Contributionism, I like the sound of it, a world without money. It just sounds like, it reminds me of, are you familiar with the creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry?
Yeah, of course. I actually refer to Star Trek quite often because it seems like pretty much everything that we've been seeing in Star Trek for 50 years now is very close to the truth, if not actually, the truth about the universe and all things in it.
I think that the kind of social structure that you're advocating with Ubuntu, it's a wonderful thing. It seems that people would need to be virtuous it seems that altruism would need to be one of the virtues that would be championed in that kind of social structure. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. But, the thing is that we might think that altruism and virtuous kind of living is something alien to human society today, but that is not really true. And this is what I believe to be so critical about the book that I'm about to release, because it actually highlights how money taints and disturbs our lives in every possible way, how it affects every crack and crevice in the fabric of society, how it infiltrates and influences everything we do in ways that we can't even imagine until we really start looking at it with a very strong magnifying glass and we realize the depths to which this control of money goes. So, you might think that people would have to change completely. Well, it's really not people that need to change. People will change automatically once you remove money from the system. It's the money that makes people behave in specific ways. In fact, it's the money that makes people make, crazy statements like human nature won't allow people to live in harmony together. That's an insane statement to make, from a position of a capitalistic society where you are making value calls and value judgments on people based on the capitalistic and consumeristic society that we've grown up in, that is completely devoid of any morals, is driven by money and controlled by money. So it is a really interesting subject to look at in great detail, and that's why I believe this book is so critical, because it tackles all these things.
And you're approaching the problem from the position of a scientist and historian, an anthropologist, and you look at this and you're saying, this has been done successfully. This contributionism has been successfully used, and it spans centuries, if not millennia, prior to... Yeah,
it spans thousands of years. Ancient civilizations lived without money for far longer than we have lived with money. Look, there are other, obviously, components and factors that play a role that one would need to consider, that we have to consider, and I'll talk about in my book. But essentially, humanity has lived without money for 270 or 280,000 years until the flood came and destroyed everything on this planet. And we only see the rise of money and the appearance of money in human life and in civilization after the flood. Prior to the flood, we know very little of what really went down. We got some interesting ideas and theories and some interesting evidence that's popping out everywhere as to what was going on this planet, right? But It's only after the flood that we start seeing a lot more real physical evidence popping out. And one of those things that happens after the flood is the sudden appearance of money out of nowhere. Money just pops out of nowhere. And this is what I need to, inform people of, is the misconception of where money comes from. Many people are of the opinion that money sort of has been, accompanying humanity in our sort of, path of evolution, and that is not the case. Money was very suddenly introduced into the human race, and maliciously introduced at a specific point in time.
So what you're saying is that although there are some that would suggest that money was supposed to be at the service of man, you're saying that money is part and parcel to slavery.
Absolutely. It is an absolute form of slavery. For those that have watched the Zeitgeist movies, would have seen a beautiful description of it in I think it's the first Zeitgeist movie, where they talk about money and how money is an absolute, unassailable, unquestionable religion in human history. It seems to be something that people just accept that money is around and always has been around, and therefore we have to use it because it's a form of exchange and there's no other way of living. That is not true. We've just been so indoctrinated and so used to it for thousands of years now that we assume that that's the way it's always been, and that is not the case. So a lot of people are resistant to even the thought of a moneyless society and a moneyless world because they erroneously believe that money has always been part of humanity and human endeavor, which is not the case. As I said, humanity has survived without money for many thousands of years longer than we have had money. And it is really at one point in time after the flood when I believe the Annunaki realized that money was not, that they could no longer control humanity around the world through physical slavery and whips and chains and, the threat of violence and so forth, that they came up with the concept of money. And this is when the guys in Zeitgeist describe it so beautifully when they say, physical slavery, where you actually own slaves as your property, which is just one of the most disgusting, human pastimes that we've had. You have to feed your slaves. You have to create shelter for them. You have to clothe them. You have to provide everything for your slaves so that they can continue working and being productive for you. Now, to overcome that, you can tell your slaves, okay, well, you're free. You can live where you want, do what you want, but you have to earn this stuff called money that you get by working from me. And with that money, you can then buy your own food, buy your own clothes, and pay for your own rent. So you've done nothing more than give the slaves the illusion that they're free, but they still have to get this thing called money so that they can continue staying alive. And that's it's just a very beautifully constructed deception.
What you just laid out there, that just opened doors to my mind. Amazing. For those of us that aren't familiar, there may be some members of the audience that aren't familiar with the Anunnaki. Could you talk a little bit about that, and could you also talk about Enki?
Yeah, the Anunnaki are the most broadly spoken about group of beings of high technological knowledge. Masters of technology way beyond we could ever imagine. They arrived on planet Earth some 450,000 years ago. That is the current sort of spoken about period. And they arrived here searching for gold. And they found gold in vast quantities, as you know, all over this planet. This planet is incredibly rich in gold. And they started settling on this planet, mining the gold. And then several 100,000 years later, they realized that they didn't have enough manpower, because they're only in small numbers, to mine enough gold, although they had this advanced technology and tools, which are actually among some of the tools and the technology that I believe I've discovered here in Southern Africa. That's when they decided they needed help, and they used some of the creatures that lived on planet Earth and their own DNA, and they created a hybrid DNA, and they basically cloned a new species, which is referred to in the Sumerian tablets as the Lulu Amelu. And these beings are written about in great detail in the Sumerian tablets. And the one person that really goes into great detail, who's devoted his life to unraveling the mysteries of the Anunnaki and their activities on planet Earth in some 14 or 15 books, is Zecharia Sitchin. He was a master scholar who truly understood the Sumerian language and could read the cuneiform text better than anybody else, and has given us a huge volume of work and information over a 45, 50-year long career until he died in 2010, October 2010. And so the Anunnaki are really the reason why humanity is so obsessed with gold. And there's some beautiful, references to it in ancient civilizations among human beings that show their obsession for gold. When the Spaniards arrived in the Americas and the European explorers started to conquer the rest of the world, whenever they came across native populations, they found that they had huge amounts of gold. And that was a big surprise to them. And they asked, well, who does the gold belong to? And the answer was always the same. The gold belongs to the gods. It's not our gold. It belongs to the gods. And even in the Bible, we got some great references that in Genesis 2, when Adam was still alone on planet Earth, Eve had not yet been fashioned from his rib. And God comes to Adam and says to him, look, there's a place called Havilah. It's a beautiful land. The land is good, the water is good, and by the way, there is gold. So it was actually God, or the biblical Elohim, and I'll come back to that later if some people don't understand that actually brought up the subject of gold to Adam. So humanity has inherited our obsession for gold from the gods. Now I mentioned a word called Elohim. The biblical original Hebrew word for God or the gods in the Bible was Elohim. And the word Elohim is a plural word. Always has been and always will be. It means the gods. And for some reason, well, we know what the reason is, to create confusion and create a singular, masculine, godlike figure, human-like figure of the Bible who is vengeful and violent and wants to control people through violence and retribution and so forth. So whenever you read the Bible and you read the word God, you've got to remind yourself the original Hebrew word for God was Elohim, and that was plural, the gods, the gods. So that creates a huge question mark as to what is really going on, what information does the Bible give us, and once you start going into that, it opens up a Pandora's box that is very exciting, but could also be quite scary for some people that have become very deeply entangled in the verbatim word of the Bible.
Fascinating. I want to go back to a point that you made about gold. What is it about the nature of gold that causes this gold fever? Why do the Anunnaki have such a fascination and desire of this metal?
Right, and this is where it gets even more interesting and more bizarre, especially for people that are new to the subject, because we think of gold as the shiny metal, gold as we know it. Well, that is commonly referred to as diatomic gold, where two golden atoms bind together to form the golden atom, A2 or AU2. But the single golden atom has actually got a valent orbit, an orbit with one electron. It's got 79 electrons in its orbits. So the outsidemost orbit is not stable, and it needs to bind with something. So the first thing it binds with, the atom of gold, would be itself, another golden atom, creating AU2, as we know it. But if that golden atom binds with something else, it creates a different substance. It does not create the gold as we see it and we know it. And that structure of gold is known as monatomic gold, or as the Bible and many ancient texts or other people and researchers today call it, the white powder of gold. And once again, the Bible is full of reference to the white powder of gold. In Exodus, when Moses goes up the mountain and he brings down the tablets from the mountain, and he finds that the people have built a golden calf. Now remember, once again, here we got gold playing a very important role. And God told the Israelites as they were leaving Egypt, take the gold from the Egyptians, go and steal it from the Egyptians. I mean, that's how bizarre it is, right? God instructs the Israelites to go and steal the gold from the Egyptians because they will need it in the desert on their journey. So what did God know, or the Elohim, or the gods, what did they know that the people did not know? And this is what the gods of the Elohim knew. That they would have to use that white powder of gold not only for themselves, because they're the ones that were obsessed with it, in its white powder or monatomic state, not the golden shiny state, and also then use it as a tool to help preserve and keep healthy the Israelites. And I'm going to explain that to you, especially for your listeners that are new to this. When Moses came down from the mountain, he saw his followers built a golden calf. What did he do? He took the golden calf and he burnt it in the fire. And he didn't turn it into molten gold, he turned it into white powder. Now, when people read the Bible, they don't read what it says because it has no meaning or reference to them when they read white powder. They just assume that it's some weird expression, right? Well, it's very specific. And then he takes the white powder and he puts it in the water and he makes the Israelites drink it. And it's referred to twice in Exodus and in Leviticus. So
I wonder if they had a case of the Mexican revenge.
Yeah.
After drinking that golden powder. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Please continue.
Look, the thing is that white powder of gold has been studied in secret laboratories and secret projects all over the world. There have been some private research studies done, and one of the people that has done that kind of research is a guy called David Hudson that lives in Phoenix, Arizona. David was in South Africa here just more than a year ago, and a year and a half ago now. And he spoke at the UFO Science and Consciousness Conference that I hosted here among 14 other speakers. And he relayed to us his experience with discovering the white powder or monoatomic form of gold. And he also gave it the name orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements, or ORMs. So if you go looking for white powder or monoatomic gold, you'll also find the expression ORMs, ORMES. David talks about some phenomenal properties that this white powder of gold exhibits. And this is what, once again, is consistent with what we read in the Bible. In the Bible, we read that the Ark of the Covenant never touched the ground. It always hovered above the ground, and it was carried by 4 people, by 4 men. Now, that's not possible, because if you do a simple calculation based on the size and the fact that the Ark was covered in gold and made out of gold, it would have weighed, the lid alone, according to some researchers that have done the calculation, the lid alone would have been 1.5 tons. So we're dealing with a structure that would have been probably about 3 or more tons. 4 guys are not going to carry that. And it clearly describes it in the Bible that the Ark of the Covenant floated above the surface of the world, and was pushed along rather than carried by these 4 guys. So what was it that made it levitate? And that's exactly what makes us think that it was probably filled with the substance, the white powder or monatomic gold, because that's exactly what the white powder gold does. It exhibits anti-gravity properties. It is a superconductor. When consumed, it heals disease. It heals your DNA. It realigns your DNA in very interesting ways, which pretty much then heals and cures disease, which suggests that it aligns the harmonic resonance frequencies of your body to your surroundings, so that you are at ease and not in dis-ease with your surroundings, and therefore you're not sick, and therefore you're not in disease. And it's a phenomenal substance. And the gods, or the Elohim, or the Annunaki, as many people like myself believe, who the Elohim actually were, the Annunaki were obsessed with the gold because they consumed it. They were obsessed with physical form, physical bodies, and they used this white powder of gold for their immortality, for physical perfection, to heal and cure disease, and so forth. And this is also why in classic mythology, you also see the depictions of the Greek and the Roman and the ancient gods as these perfect humanoid beings of immortality, pretty much giving us an idea of the Annunnaki's obsession with physical form and the physical immortality.
Extraordinary. You mentioned healing and immortality. Does that go hand in hand and coincide with their advanced technology and things of that nature? I know that there is some evidence of ancient machines. In your estimation, would that all be part of what the Anunnaki had left behind?
Oh, definitely. Like I said earlier, the Anunnaki were and still are, whatever form they are in today, which is really difficult to say at this stage because there's a lot of disinformation out there as well. They're masters of technology, absolute geniuses, and they're obsessed with technology. They're also obsessed with enslaving beings for their own personal benefit. What they did on this planet by creating the species called the human race as a slave to work in the gold mines, because that's really what we were created for. This is not the only planet they've done this on. They seem to have done this on at least one other planet and probably many other more planets. So their obsession with technology is used not only because it's technology. Also, I must state very specifically here that the technology we use today is not really advanced technology. It is just technology that has been turned into tools of enslavement, or the tools and the toys and the gadgets that we've been given by the so-called, developers and technology we've been using, and mostly is silica-based, and silicon chip technology and fiber optics, silicon-based technology, which is linked to enslavement. And from our cell phones to the motor cars to laser and phaser technology, all connected to silica and the use of silicon technology.
I've always thought, I'm sorry, go ahead, Michael.
No, I would just really want to finish to say that technology is given to us in small bite-sized chunks just to keep us busy running around like hamsters on a wheel, thinking that we got technology, but it's just really a distraction. It's got nothing to do with advanced technology. The true advanced technology that the Annunaki use is an absolute understanding of the laws of nature and how to use it. It's like having, the full download of information, and we just getting being given snippets of the technology to keep us, occupied and enslaved.
Can I ask for speculation on your part? What do you think happens to that race of beings? I mean, the Anunnaki, are they still here? Did they escape this planet? Did they leave? Did they take what they wanted and leave this planet? I mean, what do you suppose happened to them? Did they remain? Did they become the world banking elite? Do you have any speculation on what happened with them?
I think pretty much all of the above that you mentioned, Michael. Yeah. Many of them had left. Some of them stayed behind for possibly reasons beyond their control. So they're often referred to by many in the area of research as the Anunnaki remnants. It is also theorized that many of them, as you suggested, have become the banking elite or are part of the royal bloodlines, the royal political bloodlines. And it's interesting because that is supported in the Sumerian tablets, in what are referred to as the king's lists. The king's lists tell us that these Anunnaki kings ruled the world for hundreds of thousands of years, at a 240,000 year period. And they give us their names, they tell us where they ruled, and what regions they ruled, and for how long each one of these kings ruled. And there were 8 of these kings that ruled before the flood. 8 of these Anunnaki kings. Clearly they weren't human because they ruled for thousands of years each. And then something happens. Something unexpected happens. And it is that event that many people refer to as the biblical flood or the great flood that becomes the dividing line between the ante and the post-diluvian period on Earth, or pre-flood and post-flood period, that pretty much changes everything with regard to human evolution and the human consciousness and the rise of so-called sudden civilization, which is not really civilization, but let's call it that for now.
When you look at that time, that antediluvian, post-diluvian, there's a list of flood myths all over the known world.
Oh yeah.
There are several different stories about this great flood. Now, my question is, do you have any idea of what caused the flood? Was it caused by the Anunnaki? I mean, did they do this to try and reduce the population of man, fearing that they would be overthrown? Or, what do you think caused this? Did this tie in with Nibiru or Wormwood or, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, Michael, that's a good one. It's quite possible that the Anunnaki might have actually assisted in causing the flood by changing the course of the planet Nibiru that came very close to our planet. It's quite possible because they certainly have the technology and had the technology to do that kind of stuff, to perform those kind of feats based on what we read in the Sumerian tablets. How they could shape mountains and some of the incredible feats of ancient civilizations that we see where tops of mountains have been removed like with surgical precision. If you can do something like that and make it look like child's play, then you could possibly alter the course of a planet with the technology that you have. So it's possible that they actually did it on purpose to create the destruction of the planet because they weren't happy with the way it was going. The creature that they created was just getting out of control, and this was a quick and easy way to wipe them all out. Mm. On the other hand, what we do know is that they knew that the flood was coming, and this is why Enki, the guy that was in charge of the gold mining empire down here in southern Africa, one of the two brothers, and it's believed by many that Enlil was actually the biblical god of vengeance that is referred to in the Old Testament especially, that is, not a nice character, that smites people for all kinds of reasons and kills, entire cities because people didn't do X, Y, or Z, and so forth. And Enki was the other brother who looked after the gold mining here in southern Africa and did obviously a very good job based on what we found here. So they knew that the flood was coming. They knew that Nibiru, according to the Sumerian tablets and Sitchin's interpretations of it, was going to come very close to planet Earth, and that would have caused huge geophysical effects. And based on our current knowledge, and I've just actually had this discussion 2 or 3 days ago with one of the foremost astronomers in South Africa, who, confirmed some of the activities that happen with comets and unknown flying objects in our solar system, that most of the comets and space debris approaches Earth from the southern galactic plane, from the southern ecliptic, so from the South Pole, towards the South Pole. So by the time it's visible to the people in the northern hemisphere, it's already gone past the southern pole of planet Earth, and it normally moves to the sun, and because it's attracted by our sun, obviously. And by the time it reaches the sun, that's when it really becomes visible to us, and especially to the people in the northern hemisphere. So in ancient times, when most of the activity was happening in the northern hemisphere and in the south, it was just really the gold mining that was going on. When Nibiru was coming, just like all the other comets that we find, the rogue comets and even the known comets come from the south towards the sun. When it came past the southern pole or past planet Earth, it dislodged the ice sheets of Antarctica. This is according to the translations of Sitchin. And it makes absolute sense because, once again, I'm finding more and more evidence that suggests and supports those translations and that theory. For example, some of the structures that we found and the pyramidal structures connected to Adam's calendar have a trail, like a deposit trail that leads north, which suggests that the dislodging of the ice sheets caused the giant tidal waves that were several kilometers high and pretty much covered the entire planet. Like, imagine a giant tidal wave going from the South Pole like an elastic band moving across planet Earth until it reaches the North Pole, and then it probably bounces against each other and neutralizes the wave, or could possibly create a reverse reaction and the wave starts to move backwards again towards the South Pole.
Wow. Oh man. Now I have a question.
And this is all consistent. So there's a lot of interesting information, and the more you read Sitchin and the more you start comparing what we've discovered here in South Africa and Zimbabwe, it supports a lot of what Sitchin has written, and therefore I often say that we have now finally presented the physical evidence of what Sitchin has been writing about, in his 40-plus year career.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I did get a question from a member of the audience that wondered about the veracity of Sitchin in relationship to to his books on the Sumerian tablets, and you're saying it's a credible source.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you'll find, I have this discussion often, and you'll find anyone who devotes his life and career to something will have many detractors and people that try to undermine you and so forth. I'm not saying Sitchin was 100% correct, but he is more correct and more accurate than anybody else.
Okay.
And one of the, arguments has been, for example, that there's no reference to the Annunaki in any of the Sumerian tablets, especially the ones that you find on Oxford University website, and it's absolute nonsense. Just go onto Oxford University and you'll find the Annuna gods. They keep referring to the Annuna gods, they constantly. What you'll find though is that, quite frankly, anything comes out of any university, I have, huge doubts about, because universities are controlled by the Illuminati and the funding of the bankers.
Yes.
So they will control the information, and they will steer it in very deceitful and deceptive ways to aid them and not to contradict them. But obviously information comes out all the time that is, breakthrough scientific and breakthrough research, which is not necessarily what they want. But if you compare Sitchin's translations and what you find on the Oxford Press or Oxford University website, is like comparing grade 1s or 5-year-olds reading Shakespeare and trying to make sense of Shakespeare and giving you their 5-year-old interpretation of what Shakespeare is actually talking about, and a student of Shakespeare that has studied it for 40 years and actually understands exactly what Shakespeare is talking about and gives you his translation. That's the difference.
Indeed. Question?
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, and so the Annuna gods is referred to all the time, and this is where they get it wrong, because as Sitchin points out, the gods were known as the gods of heaven and earth. Annuna suggests the gods of heaven. If you add the word ki to it, Annunaki means gods of heaven and earth, because ki was their word for earth, as in Dur Anki, where heaven and earth meet, a place where heaven and earth meet. So there's some phenomenal stuff, but not only that, I've got at least 2 sources of people that have worked with Sitchin for extended periods of time, very credible people in their own right. The first one is Miho Ledwith, one of the most knowledgeable theologians alive today, who worked for many decades with Zecharia Sitchin, knows a great deal about the Sumerian tablets himself, and only has great things to say about Zecharia Sitchin, and actually confirms that he was a man of integrity and highest professional standard and knowledge, and was the only guy that truly understood the Sumerian cuneiform language. And the other guy that I spoke to was actually the curator of the curator of the Santa Barbara Museum, who worked with Zecharia Sitchin for extended periods of time, and said exactly the same thing, that he was a guy that truly understood his art and his subject far more so than anyone else he's ever met.
That clears it up pretty well for me. I'm sure for our listener that asked that question. Here's a question from a fellow South African, and this is in regards to one of your early works, Adam's Calendar. He wanted to know, there were some issues surrounding the government in South Africa placing restrictions on people, restricting visitors away from that area. Are those restrictions still in place? Is this still a restricted area? Are they playing games down there, Michael, with preventing people from seeing the site?
Well, I'm not sure what's going on at the highest levels. Clearly they are aware of it by now. They're no longer restricting us from going there. We have resumed tours I think it was in March or April this year we started taking tours there, but it was closed for about 6 months, where they prevented us from going there, and just, they locked all the gates, and they just, I wasn't sure what they were doing. There was something really strange going on. They claimed that it was because there was ecological damage done, and it was really done by Johann Heine, who went there and he cleared the site and he sort of cut the grass around the stones so that he could do proper aerial photography, so we could see the layout of the site very clearly on the photographs for analysis. And then they accused us. For some reason they thought it was me that did it, but it wasn't I. It was Johann that went and did the clearing of the site, and he took his photographs, and then they freaked out because, he cut out a lot of the invasive species, bushes and vegetation that were encroaching there on the natural habitat, and he did it on his own accord, because he runs the firefighting unit here in South Africa. And under normal conditions, he's got permission, and that's really his mandate, is to do exactly that. The eradication of invasive species to prevent unnecessary fires in forestry areas and so forth. So he did what he's supposed to do, but they didn't like it when he did it at the site. But I must add this, that at this stage, as it stands now, the site of Adam's Calendar has not yet been officially recognized as an ancient archaeological and historical site by the South African government. It is still referred to by the government and all the universities and all the archaeological departments in South Africa. None of them have been there that I know of, and I know pretty much who goes there because of the tour guide that we work with, and he's the only guy that's got access. And not one senior archaeologist or academic from any of the South African universities has ever been to Adam's Calendar, yet they go on record declaring that it's just a bunch of stones. And it's just spectacular how they're denying this ancient heritage, while it is a well-recognized site by the ancient shaman, the knowledge keepers, and the African elders and wise men who call it a sacred site, as Baba Credo Mutwa shared with me. He was initiated there in 1937 as a young shaman, and he calls it one of the most sacred sites on earth, where heaven mated with Mother Earth, and humanity was created by the gods. So it is known by the ancient African knowledge keepers, and our current government completely dismisses it and denies it.
So you have not a shred of doubt in your mind that this was the place where man's origins began, right here.
I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever. There's so much overwhelming evidence that it has pushed any doubt way out of my mind by now.
I've looked at your site, michaeltellinger.com, and you have several photographs there, aerial photographs looking down, bird's eye view, and you have various geometric shapes placed atop the actual ruins. One looks like a Star of David, another looks like a hexagram, or a hexagon rather. And I was curious, what do you make of that? Why the geometric shapes and patterns there? What power did that have, or what symbolism did what meaning did that hold?
Well, remember that sacred geometric shapes are all high energy devices and high energetic shapes and structures. Just like any symbol or any shape or any carving, any image, are all energy devices. But specifically, sacred geometry shapes and patterns are extremely powerful energetic devices, and are capable of generating energy. So especially a star tetrahedron, or a Star of David, as some would call it, which is one of the most crucial shapes and structure in sacred geometry. And for people that still think that sacred geometry is some sort of wishy-washy religious strange belief system, the word sacred doesn't really mean religious, the sacred in this particular context means to fixed. Sacred as in fixed geometry according to the fixed principles of creation, the divine creation. So that's why it's called sacred geometry, because these are the fundamental structures that are at the basis, the foundation of the nature of reality, and the fundamental structure of matter and subatomic particles all follow the principles of sacred geometry. So, and you'll find that what's happening with these devices is they'll be encoded in pretty much all ancient structures in some way or another. And this is something we're only realizing now. The Great Pyramid of Giza, pyramidal structures are sacred geometric structures. The sacred geometry that is part of a pyramid structure. Because we're dealing with tetrahedron structures, we're dealing with octahedrons, we're dealing with the 5 platonic shapes, that Plato introduced us to in more recent times, which he just, obviously understood the laws of nature and sacred geometry. And let me tell you, Plato, everything that Plato shared with us is just spectacularly accurate and remains accurate. The more you start to look into the, physics and science and quantum physics and start to cross over into the nature of reality, where you start to understand metaphysics and
it's
the
great
weird
stuff, isn't it? It's great stuff, Plato. I love the allegory of the cave. Isn't that brilliant?
Yeah, it's
he knew human nature
he's
so
the guy.
well. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I have to throw Aristotle in there too, if you don't mind.
No, absolutely, but for some reason Plato is coming up more and more, also because of the work that I do with the brilliant Willem de Swart here in Johannesburg on what we call the secret numbers of God. And Willem has just decoded what I believe the most spectacular body of knowledge and information that has never been unveiled before, in a way that he's done it. And that's really just linking numbers, geometry, sacred geometry, to science, physics, quantum physics, and how all that knowledge is encoded in the tarot cards, specifically the 22 major arcana tarot cards, and how that information is now being encoded, or has been encoded for the last 100 years or so in all the Hollywood blockbusters. And prior to that has been encoded in great works of literature like Shakespeare and others, and also obviously great works of art, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, just two obvious examples because they're probably the most famous. But there are many other great works of art, historic artworks that are encoded in this knowledge and information and sacred geometry, but also far more deeper esoteric symbolisms.
Let me ask you about the sacred geometry once again. So, do you suggest that the Annunaki constructed these devices, this sacred geometry, to become the focal point of energy, or some kind of transformational energy, or is it like a generator, or how do you explain that? I mean, what was the purpose behind it?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's something we sort of skipped. So let me just quickly go back and draw a picture for your listeners here. The stone circles of southern Africa are great structures of mystery, have been for 500 years. It's nothing new. The first references that we get about the stone circles are in the late 1400s, early 1500s, from the Portuguese explorers that came around the Cape of Good Hope, and they started writing about these circular stone structures and these enclosures that they were encountering and finding throughout southern Africa. And by 1891, a British archaeologist by the name of Theodore Bent, who was in southern Africa for just more than 2 years, I believe, traveled on horseback and did some great work as an archaeologist, specifically also on Great Zimbabwe. And he's written a spectacular book on his work and his research in Great Zimbabwe, giving us a lot of very important information that is just very conveniently put in file 13 and forgotten about by today's archaeology. There have been speculations about these sites for, as I said, for hundreds of years, but nobody really knew how many of these sites there were until I've started getting involved in 2007 when Jan Heine first introduced me to these stone structures. And I realized very quickly that these stone circles were inextricably linked to what I wrote about in Slave Species of God, to the Annunaki, the gold mining empire in South Africa and Southern Africa, and what Sitchin has been writing about for, 35 years, 40 years. So we are looking at the physical evidence of the Anunnaki gold mining activities, but what becomes interesting is the number of these stone circles, and then also the fact that they don't have doors and entrances. So we've got, first of all, the speculations have been, a few thousand of these structures, and then, 20,000 or so, and then I estimated about 100,000 in 2007. And then when I started actually doing a proper count and approaching it scientifically, getting averages and doing it as accurately as I possibly could, I came up with a number that blew my mind and never expected, and came up with more than 10 million of these stone structures scattered throughout southern Africa.
Good Lord. I didn't have any idea that there was that many.
Yeah. No, there are more than 10 million of these so-called cattle kraal, because all our history books still refer to them as cattle kraal. And stone structures that of little historic value or importance, because most of them were just built as cattle enclosures and possibly dwellings by migrating Bantu tribes as they were coming in from the north and settling in southern Africa. They would build these structures and then move on. And it's just such a nonsensical statement to make, because it's a clear indication that whoever makes such statements has done no research, is making these kind of statements and writing them in our history books with no scientific backup or scientific support for these idiotic statements, because there's nothing else I can call it. They're just ignorant and idiotic statements, and actually very dangerous, because they completely devalue and desecrate ancient knowledge and wisdom and a huge civilization that we know nothing about. So by the time that I counted more than 10 million of these stone structures, at that moment you realize that we're dealing with something that we've never encountered before. A vast, vanished civilization that existed for hundreds of thousands of years at the southern tip of Africa, and everything about it can be linked with spectacular evidence to the mining of gold. But what becomes even more interesting and bizarre is that all of these structures that I'm referring to here have no doors and entrances. Those that do have doors and entrances are just recent modifications. Obviously, civilizations built on top of each other, and they reuse each other's structures. But the original structures have no doors and entrances, and they're all connected by these weird channels or roads, and they're often referred to as roads, and again by ignorant historians and researchers, roads, and sometimes even they throw in that these roads were built by the Bantu tribes to drive their cattle on. And it just makes me quite mad when they put these things in our official history books, and these history books are distributed to universities, and this is what our students read, and they take it at face value because it comes from Professor so-and-so and the Doctor so-and-so, and they just talk garbage and fill the heads of our youth with garbage.
What purpose or function do you think that those connecting constructions served?
Well, this is when the penny drops, when you realize that they clearly weren't dwellings, because if you don't have doors and entrances, you're not dealing with dwellings. And this has been confirmed in various other ways through, I guess you can call them esoteric means, and alternative means, through channeling information, and also through past life regression, not just my own, but various other people that have confirmed very interesting theories that I had originally that have now been supported by a lot of information of this kind. But the best, support for my theory has come in the form of electronic measurements and actual scientific measurements in these stone circles and also at Adam's calendar, that clearly show us that these are devices of extremely high energy. Huge amounts of electromagnetic energy is being generated there inside the circles. Nothing on the outside, only inside the circles. Incredibly powerful electromagnetic waves that run into the hundreds of megawatts, and the Adam's calendar runs into 1700, 1800 megawatts.
That's incredible. So this is like some kind of directed energy device, you think?
Yeah, and the energy is created out of sound, and this is where the penny starts to drop. How the Annunaki understand the laws of nature, and they know how to utilize it for advanced technology. You don't need fancy tools and fancy gimmicks and shiny metal and, little toys that you call fancy technology, because the technology is all around us. The planet Earth is a giant technological device. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you want to call it that. And for people that have studied and looked at the work of Hans Jenny and the Chladni plates, that understand cymatics and how sound manifests physical shape and physical form, it starts to ring bells when you listen to and read ancient philosophies of creation from different civilizations. And it becomes very evident that we're dealing with some sort of a resonance. After all, it was God that said, "Let there be light," and the primordial Om that created the universe and all things in it. And the Graham Hancock's been telling us how the Egyptians sang the universe into creation. So it's all to do with sound and resonance.
Harmonics and frequencies. Fascinating. Exactly. And this is the kind of thing that Nikola Tesla picked up on, one of the greatest scientists in the history of the world, I think, anyway. I think he really took this ball and ran with it. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. Please continue.
No, and I'm glad you brought up Tesla, because it was actually Nikola Tesla's one of his books that I picked up by accident, and I was reading some of his written notes from his research, and it says, and he makes a statement there that seems to have been missed by all the other researchers, because I've certainly not picked it up anywhere else until I read this little manual. And he says that the Earth rings like a bell, and it's a constant source of energy. It's an inexhaustible source of energy. In fact, it is the reason why the Earth exists. It is like the consciousness of Mother Earth is the sound of Mother Earth that is linked to the consciousness. And it is a free source of energy. You're not burning water or extracting oil or, creating hydrogen. It is the sound frequency of Mother Earth that is an inexhaustible source of energy. And if you know how to tap into that sound, you can use that sound of Gaia, Mother Earth, as a source of energy wherever you are.
Are you familiar? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and it's really that suddenly made me realize that, along with a few other, unexpected incidences that I've had here, that made me realize that the stones that were used to build these stone structures actually have very strong acoustic properties, and they ring like bells. And I realized that the stones were used for that reason, because of their acoustic resonance properties, and they were basically, every stone you could call like a string in a piano. The stone would be like an instrument and a resonating device in the wall of each one of those circles. But you were going to ask something.
That's extraordinary. I was going to ask about one of the most impressive, spectacular, sensational discoveries I've ever seen: the footprint. Can you talk about about the footprint? I just
all right. Let me just quickly finish.
Sure, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Your question that you asked about the channels that connect the circles, we haven't finished that. But the footprint we've got to talk about that, because it is a spectacular global archaeological site that, as I say on the little video clip, 20 million people a year should be coming here looking at that, because it's truly magnificent beyond words. But what we're dealing with here, Michael, is just the entire southern African subcontinent was one giant energy grid, because every one of these stone circles is an energy device. As I say, we've measured it. There can be absolutely no doubt about it. And the channels that connect them are just really channels like wires connecting one little energy device to the other, spreading the energy throughout the entire subcontinent. For what? For the purposes of mining gold. Remember, they used sound, they used resonance, they understood how to use that. Everything has harmonic resonance principles.
Yes.
You can extract atoms and molecules if you understand resonance principles. Resonance is and harmonics is at the foundation of alchemy. You can transmutate elements and metal through alchemy and sound resonance principles. So they knew this, and so they used the sound of Mother Earth, of Gaia, to create these energy devices. And there have been many others. That one of them is Herbert Froelich, that suggested that sound is a precursor to electromagnetism. Well, guess what? The Bible tells us that. The Hindus and the Buddhists tell us that. And the Aboriginal people tell us that sound came before the electromagnetic universe. It was the sound of the Creator that created the universe, which is an electromagnetic universe.
In the beginning,
Right.
in the beginning was the Word, right?
Exactly.
There you go. Yeah, how about that?
So now we've got these 10 million and more energy devices that use the sound frequency of Mother Earth, converting that sound energy into electromagnetic energy, channeling it down these channels, creating a huge energy grid that was used for the mining and the separation of minerals, specifically gold. Also, obviously, other minerals, I guess, that they were after, but it was mostly gold. And then, obviously, the question is, where is the gold? Where is the gold?
Yeah,
300,000 years, 450,000 years of gold mining, and there is no gold to be seen. And if you've been following the quest for gold by Britain and Germany, and everyone's looking for their gold, and their gold is nowhere to be found.
It definitely begs the question, where is it going?
So,
who has it?
So it's as I state in Slave Species of the Gods, the gold is not on this planet. The Annunaki have been taking the gold off the planet for hundreds of thousands of years. They came here looking for gold. They found it, and they took it home with them to their own planet. And there are various reasons why I did that. And this is where I believe where Sitchin got it wrong. Where Sitchin wasn't 100% accurate. He was very close to his translations, were very close to his interpretation, was very close to what I believe the actual objectives were, but not quite where I believe it was, what they used it for.
I have another question that just popped in my mind. Do you think the Anunnaki are interdimensional beings as well?
It seems that way. It seems a lot of information that I'm getting lately, especially in the last 6 months or so, is leading to that conclusion. But it doesn't mean that they've always been that way. Remember that they're also part of the great evolution of consciousness. And it affects them as much as it affects us. We are endowed with, for some reason that I think Enki was responsible for, and this is why he plays such a huge role in what I'm doing here and many other people, since he was the architect of the human species and the primitive worker, the Lulu Amelu, as the Sumerian tablets call it, the human race, the slave species. Since he was the architect, he actually gave us more DNA than what he was supposed to. And that allowed the slave species to grow in consciousness very rapidly, which is not what Enlil, his brother, wanted. Enlil wanted a permanent slave labor species that was dumb and would just constantly remain enslaved. Well, Enki didn't do that, and he did his own thing and allowed the species to evolve in consciousness. Basically what he did there, he did not contravene as Jerry, what's his name, the Star Trek guy.
Oh yeah, Gene Roddenberry.
Gene Roddenberry, as
Yes.
Gene Roddenberry called it, the Prime Directive. Enki did not contravene the Prime Directive. He created a new species, knowing that eventually the species would reach its own enlightenment, its own stage of higher levels of consciousness. and join the universal community of beings of higher consciousness. And that's a very important and interesting moment in human history, creation, and the point that we're at right now. And this is what I believe the Mayans were referring to when they talk about the New Age, crossing the galactic plane in 2012, activating our DNA for rapid advancement and rapid explosion in the growth of consciousness. And we're seeing that all over the world.
And do you think that they no doubt they considered us a threat then, don't you think?
Well, Enlil certainly saw humanity as a threat. It seems that Enki expected it and he knew it was coming, and this is why there was constantly a tussle. This sort of good and bad, archetype comes from Enlil and Enki, and is echoed in most of the ancient so-called mythology. The good and bad, versus
yin and yang.
Yin and yang and all that. Obviously it's got many deeper spiritual connotations as well in terms of the duality of the universe that we find ourselves in and so forth. But the Enki Enlil archetype are critical in us understanding what happened here in the creation of the species that we belong to, and the attempted manipulation and the continued manipulation of the species. And as we said right up front, money is the tool that is now being used. But now, as you can see, the global explosion, Occupy Wall Street was just the beginning of it, to make people wake up to the atrocities committed by the banksters. That they've become a law unto themselves. They've bought all the countries and the governments around the world. They own and run every government on this planet, maybe with the exception of a few that are just rogue governments and have some other weird agenda that we probably don't quite understand at this stage. But the rest of the world is run by the bankers, which are extensions of the royal bloodlines, and they control the money through not physical enslavement, but the world through physical enslavement, but through money. And it's a perfect design for enslavement, because, as Wolfgang Goethe told us, none are more enslaved than those who believe they are free. and remember that was also beautifully explained by Morpheus in the Matrix. He explains the matrix of enslavement so beautifully to Neo before he gives him the blue and the red pill, right? You can carry on being asleep and staying in the matrix. But if you take I forget which pill he took, then you go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And once you go through that door, there ain't no turning back, because you become enlightened and you realize what's going on.
Yeah, once you take that door, there is no turning back, because you'll never think the same way again. You just don't.
Yeah. So it's really up to us, Michael, to do what you're doing and keep spreading the knowledge and information, but also be sensitive to those that are very new to this information. And it's scary to a lot of people, because one of the most effective tools of control of humanity today is fear, the fear tactics and the fear mongering. This is why we constantly, the war on terror and the war on drugs and the control of every level and the violence and crime, and it's the fear tactic.
It's a powerful emotion that is used as a means of control. Yeah.
And the fear of losing your job, and fear of ending up on the street, and fear of just not having food, and the fear of everything. It's ridiculous, When you break yourself free from that fear, is the most wonderful, enlightening moment that anybody can experience.
It's an extraordinary thing that you should say that, because that sentiment of be not afraid and have no fear and fear not, it's mentioned over 300 times in the Bible. Isn't that something? Old Testament and New. How about that? Yeah. I think they were trying to tell us something,
Well, they were trying to tell us something, and this is why I really feel a great sadness for the preachers that stand on these, evangelical pulpits every Sunday, and they preach the Bible verbatim, reading what I've started calling the soap opera, and they preach the soap opera to the people, completely ignorant of the depth of meaning and knowledge and information that is encoded in that book. It is spectacular with its knowledge and information. It's got everything we want to know in it, from the laws of nature, the creative process of the divine creator, of understanding quantum physics, to understanding multiple universes, to understanding the materialization and dematerialization of matter. You know, like when God says, I created that which can be seen from that which is not seen. You know, I mean, if that's not a clear statement of materializing and dematerializing and the, you know, basically in a sense referring to the double slit experiment and stuff that we're discovering in science and quantum physics today, that book, the Bible, is so filled with advanced knowledge and information, but these poor, confused preachers, you know, they get caught up in the soap opera and they confuse the living daylights out of the people out there.
Oh, there's a multivalent understanding of the text. It's just it's almost like a never-ending mine shaft, depth and, the truth that can be gleaned from the pages is remarkable.
So what I was really leading up to is that we need to be very sensitive to people and Christians and people that have got deep faith in religion, because they want to believe in something good. It's not that they're evil and they want to, they desperately trying to find the good and the love in life and the universe and creation, but they're clinging onto the wrong end of the stick, if I can use that expression.
I understand what you mean.
But so we got to be very gentle with these people and not fill them with even more fear and let them accuse us of being devil worshippers and the Satan and the Antichrist, because that's what they very conveniently do if you approach them with things that they are fearful of. Remember, once again, it's the fear tactic that's being used on them. So they're fearful of going into areas of new knowledge and information. But it seems that, I've done my presentations to thousands and thousands of people around the world, and to Christians and Jews and Muslims and you name it, to Hindus and Buddhists. They are much easier to talk to because they actually have a philosophy that seems to be far more resonant with the nature of reality and the creative process.
Yes, their understanding of truth, objective truth, subjective truth, definitely would, the Eastern thought would definitely be receptive to what you're trying to say. Definitely.
But I found that the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims, which are really all come from the same source, they all come from Abraham being the founding father of those three religions.
Yes.
And yet they think they're so far removed from each other. They're not. So I found that once these people sit through the presentation that I give and follow the steps, they're certainly not afraid. They leave there confused about what they've been taught up to that point, and they're filled with more questions that allow them to lose the fear, but continue asking more questions about what they thought was, what they were taught was absolute truth. Suddenly no longer seems to be the absolute truth, and that there's a much bigger picture to what they've been told all their lives. And that's great, because that's what we need to do, is make people realize that there is no fear. Stop fearing things. That's the tool that's being used against us. And as you said, it's mentioned so many hundreds of times in the Bible and all ancient culture.
300.
300 times.
Yes, 300 times. Can you believe that?
I'll quote you.
You may quote me on that. I'm certain of it. You can find in an exhaustive concordance if you wanted to take the time to look. But, hey, we forgot the one. I asked you a question. I beg your pardon. I want to remind you, about the footprint. You gotta talk about the footprint.
The footprint is just a spectacular, what should one call it? It's not an artifact. What is it? What could we call it? It's
an archaeological discovery.
Yeah, a site.
A site, there you go.
A relic, a remnant. It's spectacular. It literally takes your breath away. And it's about 4 feet tall. It sits at a absolute vertical angle in bedrock, going up into the sky, which many people, when they first see it for the first time, the ignorance, they make silly statements on your website or on your YouTube clip saying, "Well, where was he walking into the sky? Ha ha ha!" Stuff like that. It's like It's that fear once again, you know. But the spectacular thing is that it's made in rough granite. It's got a very specific name in geological terms in the geological books in South Africa. It's referred to as cruciform granite, which is very rough granite with beautiful large chunks of silica and other materials that make up the granite, but you know, a lot of silica in there, obviously. And then you obviously get the geologists and the homemade geologists that jump up and down instantly and say, well, it's not possible for it to be a footprint because granite is an igneous rock and it's not possible for you to leave a footprint in it and blah, blah, blah. And, you know, they'll throw every argument that they possibly can at it instead of saying, okay, well, here it is. How did it get there? It's in rough granite. It's not supposed to be there. And yet here it is. You know, it's not a carving. It's not erosion. It's not accidental. It's not an act of God. It is somebody's foot that was left in this material at a stage that it would have been to allow it to leave a footprint. So let's set aside our preconceived ideas of what we've been taught about geology. You know, and if you speak to geologists and metallurgists about white powder of gold or monatomic gold, they would tell you that you're talking nonsense because they've never heard of it. And they make statements, absolute statements like that. You know, the fact that I've never heard of it is not a scientific argument. It just means that I'm ill-informed. Yes. And I need to go back to the drawing board and inform myself better about the subject. So I would suggest that all the geologists and archaeologists that jump up and down and say it's not possible, go back to the drawing board and start thinking about how this could have happened. So everything you think you know and everything you've been taught out of the window, because clearly they missed something out in your education process about geology. I've got two possible suggestions by two individuals that are highly experienced in this, that give a very simple explanation how this could have happened. But you were going to ask a question.
No, please continue. I had a theory of my own I wanted to share, but go ahead.
No, well, tell us. I want to hear what your theory is.
I had the idea that, first off, I think that this was a very large individual that left this footprint. He must have been between 13 and 20 feet tall, would you figure?
Possibly bigger.
Maybe
probably
bigger.
Like 23, 24, 25 feet. Yeah.
Holy smokes. Okay, so he's this large. Now, that footprint could have been left so long ago that the soft material that he stepped in became granite over the thousands of years. Or
actually millions of years.
Millions of years. Okay, millions of years. Or that individual that left, that put his foot on the granite might have had some kind of ability to affect the molecular structure of the granite to take the shape of his foot, almost like suspending the laws of nature, and it actually pushed against granite as though it were wax. And as far as the orientation of the footprint, I would just say, through the natural course of time, could be earthquakes, landslides, mudslides, you name it, that pushed that footprint that would have been horizontal into the vertical position. But anyway, glacial activity, who knows? Anyway, your thoughts and
yeah, look, Michael, at least you're allowing yourself to go there and think about it. While a lot of people that have got formal education, and as we mentioned already, I no longer trust anything that comes out of any university because we know the agenda.
Yes,
right?
Yes, we do.
Remember, just in case people don't understand what I'm saying, the agenda behind our current education is to produce people with certificates, degrees, and certificates. Certificate suggests a level of ownership. That means you're owned through the certificate that they've given you. And through that certificate, you now have a permission to go and seek jobs and employment. What do jobs and employment do? They pay you money. Bingo, we've done 360 degrees. We're back to back to those people who control the supply of money. Isn't that a cushy little situation they've created for themselves?
Yes,
you know,
Mm-hmm.
and they make us scramble and run around like crazy hamsters on a wheel, desperate for these certificates so we can earn money. Oh boy, they're so clever. They are so brilliant at this. Nevertheless, so let's come back. So this is why I don't trust anything that comes from our schooling or education system. And in my Ubuntu contributionism book, I propose a whole new education system that some people have sent emails to me with tears in their eyes saying that this is what our education should be like. When can we start this? You know, so it's very exciting times we're in. But so the footprint and the alternative theories. I like your theories and it's quite possible. Anything is possible, remember?
Oh, yes.
But the two theories that I've been given are just so spectacular because they're so simple. The first one was actually sent to me in a book by a geologist himself who wrote a book on ancient geology. I forget his name now. I must actually get it out and get some of the statements from his book. But from his email that he sent me, he quickly outlined the situation that would have caused and led to somebody in ancient times, a giant being that could have and obviously did leave a footprint in the substance that eventually became granite, as you call it, substance that eventually became granite. And he, in his book, describes the geological processes that have been taking place on planet Earth, occurring over millions of years and billions of years, as we know as well. And those processes over billions and millions of years are situations and circumstances that we don't really understand today, because we are just living here for a few thousand years now, experiencing the effect of those geological processes. And one of those would have been giant movement of tectonic plates, glacial activity, that huge ice sheets that move huge amounts of rocks and geological material, removing mountains, crushing stone, mixing stone, and creating a new mixture of substance that then eventually settles and becomes hard and hardens. Through the processes of moving also creates huge movement of tectonic plates that creates pressure and heat underground, pushing out igneous rock, volcanic, molten rock, and mixing and interacting with some of this fine powdered gravel that is lying on the surface of planet Earth. And he describes fascinating activity from a geological perspective that is not often imagined or perceived by us today. So he concurs that that's definitely possible. Somebody could have left a footprint in there, and we shouldn't be so, upset about it, as some people seem to get very upset about it, that we can believe this kind of nonsense when it's facing us, staring us in the face. It's like, here's the footprint, but it's not really there.
It also seems to attest to the belief that many people have about the giant skeletons that are all over the world. The discoveries, archaeological digs turning up these gigantic skeletons, humanoid skeletons of beings from thousands of years ago. And when you see a footprint like that one you've illustrated, the two fit hand in glove, don't they?
Yeah, well, I can tell you absolutely from first-hand knowledge and experience from my good friend Klaus Donner, one of the world's leading experts on unexplained archaeological mysteries and sites on Earth. Klaus Donner has spent a lot of time with me here in South Africa. In fact, one of the video clips at the Giant Footprint is with Klaus Donner. And he has actually found bone fragments of a giant being that would fit the description of whoever left that giant footprint, about 7.5 meters tall. And Klaus Donner has absolute physical evidence and bone fragments of 3 parts of a giant's body. The one is the heel bone of such an individual. The other is the nose bone, and the other third bone is part of the skull. All of them have been examined pathologically and confirmed that they are bone fragments of a human being, or a being that would have been about 7.5 meters tall. So we've got physical evidence of these giants of that size. And Klaus is not the only one. There have been discoveries for the past 1,000 years and more of giants around the world. But it's just people choose not to obviously believe it because it makes them feel uncomfortable.
Michael, who do you think they were? Do you think they were the Nephilim?
It's quite possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite possible because, the Bible and the rabbinic writings, Hebrew writings talk about, the Zemzubim, the Nephilim, the Seraphim, all these weird groups of beings that we know absolutely nothing about. We know a little bit about the Nephilim because at least they're mentioned in the Bible. And they talk about the Nephilim and the Anakim as well, who are seem to be related to the Nephilim, in the land of Anak, the giants, and it refers to, in Numbers, in the book of Numbers in the Bible, excuse me, it refers to the human beings that look like grasshoppers next to these giants. So clearly they were very large. They weren't just, 7 or 8 feet tall. They were a lot larger than that. The Annunaki, however, were not that tall. So there remains a great deal of mystery and uncertainty in all of this stuff. But the other interesting feedback that I've got on the giant footprint and how it could have come about is actually from a gold explorer in Canada who emailed me out of the blue after seeing my video clip and explained to me how easy and simply this can be described and explained. And he is from a family of 3 generations of gold explorers. And he says that they've been mining gold in the eastern part of Canada, where there is gold in the granite, and so they take the granite and they crush it, and they then extract the gold, and they leave behind this slurry of crushed granite, and after a while, that slurry of granite hardens like cement, and you can leave a footprint in it, and once it hardens, nobody will know that it was, previously crushed granite. It'll look like a strange kind of granite, but it's granite.
Amazing.
And he said, so that's very easily explained.
How about that? So it's like pulverized granite that, over time, bonded once again.
That's right.
Amazing.
And see, that's consistent with the other geologist who sent me his book that actually says exactly the same thing. But he says that the granite would have been pulverized through the movement of tectonic plates and the movement of glaciers, leaving behind this crushed slurry of granite powder. And if you walked in it and left a footprint, eventually it'll harden. And today we think it's granite that came out of, igneous protrusion out of Mother Earth, but that's not necessarily the case.
I dropped something in your chat box there, the Skype chat box, New Grange. Have you ever heard of it?
Yeah, I've heard of New Grange, yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had any thoughts about New Grange, any relationship to the Annunaki or anything like that?
I'm not sure.
No? Okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but it seems that there's a lot of connection between a lot of the ancient sites. Definitely, many of them are linked to the Anunnaki, especially if you can find a link to the gold mining. So if you can find a link to gold mining there, then there's probably Anunnaki activity.
Okay.
And yeah, that's the way I would look at it.
The question I wanted to ask you, this can be the last question because it sounds like you don't have the energy to go on, and I completely understand because it's so late there in South Africa. And I want to thank you ever so much for being with us and sharing your time.
It's a pleasure.
The question that I had for you was your worldview. What is Michael Tellinger's philosophy of life?
Well, it's really all encapsulated in my new book, Ubuntu Contributionism, a Blueprint for a New Social Structure, a World Without Money. I think that says it in a nutshell. And I never thought that it would be such a big volume of work, but it's more than 300 pages. I hope to get it out in the next month or so as an ebook, and then as soon as possible as a printed version. That obviously takes a bit longer. But it's critical that we get it out because we need to start talking about a way forward and having a bright light at the end of the tunnel. And that's really my view and my vision for the world. A utopian planet, the utopia that we all dream of, that we all deserve, we all should have, that we have all been denied through the enslavement for thousands of years, and specifically the last few thousand years, the enslavement of money. The moment we get rid of money, we get rid of those that are controlling humanity, the royal political bloodlines that have taken upon themselves to, control the supply of money and so forth. Once we get rid of the money, then we get rid of the tool of control, and we can all become human beings of integrity and growing consciousness. Because the moment you remove money from society, everything changes dramatically for the better. And it's quite a steep climb for some people, or a large jump, or a giant leap for many people to make, to go from where we are today, obsessed with money and capitalism and, consumerism and gimmicks, to going to a world without money, where all of that is available and much more. And some people can't figure out how that's going to be possible. Who's going to pay for it? How are we going to do that? And because they don't realize that money is actually the hurdle to all progress. Money is what prevents us from following our dreams and following our passions. And most of our passions are passions of creation, to create something, to do something positive. Whether it's creating beautiful art forms, to crazy scientists developing free energy devices and levitation devices, to chemists developing problems for solving the problems of sewage, converting into energy and compost and fertilizer, to everything and anything that people want to do, from baking most beautiful breads to whatever. They're prevented from doing that by money. The moment you take money out of the system and everyone can do what they are supposed to do or they want to do, not what they're supposed to, what they want to do because they're passionate about it, and make that their contribution towards the greater benefit of all the people in the community that they choose to live in and not forced to live in because of economic circumstance, the whole world and the whole structure changes dramatically, so dramatically that it is a beautiful journey of discovery as you start going through this process and imagining that kind of utopian world. All we have to do is take money out the system. So that's in a nutshell what my vision for the world is.
I like it very much, Michael. I like what you have to say. I sincerely hope that it becomes a reality. I know it's possible. I sincerely hope that it is. I know that there are people like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with a fellow by the name of Thomas Sheridan, who's written several books on psychopaths and those individuals that seem to have taken positions of power in our world. Those kinds of people would be very difficult to convince that your way of contributionism, the Ubuntu way, the ancient way, is the best way, given the nature of who and what they are. That's...
Yeah, but remember that you're referring to a number of people that are controlling the world, compared to 7 billion human beings who desperately want to be loved, want to share love, want to be happy, want to live a fulfilled life, want to give expression to their God-given talents, that are tired of slaving around, tired of their misery. Everybody wants the same thing. We all want to be happy and live fulfilled lives. So whether these people that are controlling the world like it or not, it's going to change. And the process of enlightenment and the rise of consciousness is what drives the change.
And it's happening. And it's happening now, isn't it, Michael? I mean, just just within the last few years, hasn't there been, in your experience, this great awakening? I mean, it's palpable. You can see that more and more people are rousing from their slumber to the truth and to reality, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. But once again, there's a scientific explanation for that. It's not just something that's happening, by accident. It's because of what just happened in 2012. The fact that we've gone through the most concentrated part of the galactic plane, where the frequencies and the energies are most concentrated. Our DNA is being activated. What does that mean? It means that more genes in our genome and our DNA are now functional. Large parts of the so-called junk DNA is being reactivated, is starting to do what it's supposed to do, and that thing that it's supposed to do is help us wake up from the slumber and from the darkness, the enlightenment process. And this is what it's all about. It's giving us the ability to contemplate our beingness and our humanness and start to recognize the atrocities that have been, committed against us, the enslavement that we face, realizing that we are enslaved, more so now than ever before in all of human history. So it's the two levels. The enslavement has gone to the highest levels it's ever been, while now it is being countered by the rise of consciousness, which is overpowering, or conquering, should I say, the enslavement, because people are waking up and say, I choose to be free. I was born free on this planet. This is my planet, that I was born free. When I was born on this planet, I came into this world without any contracts, without any obligations to anyone, without any promises to work or serve anyone. I came here with the God-given talents that I was born with, and those are the talents that I should be using for the benefit of the rest of humanity.
Michael Tallinger, I want to thank you so much for being here and my guest on TNS. It has been an absolute pleasure having you here. Do you have any final thoughts before we go?
Oh, Michael, thank you. It's been great chatting to you. Lovely insights from your side. Thank you very much for the input. I hope we managed to share some important information with people that will allow them to take this and share this with others. Lose your fear. Do not be fearful. Go out there and speak your truth. Share this information with others. Join the Ubuntu movement and start spreading the seed of consciousness, because that is ultimately what is very quickly going to take us to this planet of absolute abundance on all levels, and this beautiful planet, utopian world and life that we all deserve.
Michael Tallinger, author, scientist, explorer, thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Live Mike. Take care of each other.
Capitalistic and consumeristic society that we've grown up in, that is completely devoid of any morals, and is driven by money and controlled by money. So it is a really interesting subject to look at in great detail, and that's why I believe this book is so critical, because it tackles all these things.
And you're approaching the problem from the position of a scientist and historian, an anthropologist, and you look at this and you're saying, this has been done successfully. This contributionism has been successfully used, and it spans centuries, if not millennia, prior to... Yeah, it spans thousands of years. Ancient civilizations lived without money for far longer than we have lived with money. Look, there are other, obviously, components and factors that play a role that one would need to consider, that we have to consider, and I talk about in my book. But essentially, humanity has lived without money for 270 or 280,000 years until the flood came and destroyed everything on this planet. And we only see the rise of money and the appearance of money in human life and in civilization after the flood. Prior to the flood, we know very little of what really went down. We got some interesting ideas and theories and some interesting evidence that's popping out everywhere as to what was going on this planet, right? But It's only after the flood that we start seeing a lot more real physical evidence popping out.
And one of those things that happens after the flood is the sudden appearance of money out of nowhere. Money just pops out of nowhere. And this is what I need to, inform people of, is the misconception of where money comes from. Many people are of the opinion that money...
Michael Tellinger, a scientist and explorer, he's become a real-life Indiana Jones, making groundbreaking discoveries about ancient civilizations at the southern tip of Africa. His continued efforts and analytical, scientific approach have produced stunning new evidence that will force us to rethink the origins of man and rewrite the history books. Michael is also a prolific writer, authoring and co-authoring several bestsellers. Among them, Adam's Calendar, Discovering the Oldest Man-Made Structure on Earth, Slave Species of God, Temples of the African Gods, Slave Species of the Gods, The Secret History of the Annunaki and Their Mission on Earth, and to be released next month, May 25th, 2013, African Temples of the Annunaki, The Lost Technologies of the Gold Mines of Enki. Looking forward to that. With that, here he is from the African subcontinent, Michael Tellinger. Welcome. Great to have you with us.
Lovely to be talking to you, Michael.
How you doing?
Yeah, very well. It's 10 o'clock at night here, so I've been looking forward to our chat. Normally I do these late at night, early in the morning, so this is a nice, fresh change.
I'm glad we were able to make it convenient for you. I know it's kind of tough being on the other side of the planet. But isn't this amazing? Yeah. We have this technology that we're able to do this now. It's extraordinary.
Well, it's really the technology that is allowing us to speed up this age of enlightenment, isn't it?
It certainly is. What have you been up to recently, Michael?
Well, I've just been finishing my new book on contributionism, as I call it. The book is called Ubuntu Contributionism, Blueprint for a New Social Structure. Sort of has been accompanying humanity in our sort of path of evolution, and that is not the case. Money was very suddenly introduced into the human race, and maliciously introduced at a specific point in time.
So what you're saying is that although there are some that would suggest that money was supposed to be at the service of man, you're saying that money is part and parcel to slavery.
Absolutely. It is an absolute form of slavery. For those that have watched the Zeitgeist movies, would have seen a beautiful description of it in I think it's the first Zeitgeist movie, where they talk about money and how money is an absolute, unassailable, unquestionable religion in human history. It seems to be something that people just accept that money is around and always has been around, and therefore we have to use it because it's a form of exchange and there's no other way of living. That is not true. We've just been so indoctrinated and so used to it for thousands of years now that we assume that that's the way it's always been, and that is not the case. So a lot of people are resistant to even the thought of a moneyless society and a moneyless world because they erroneously believe that money has always been part of humanity and human endeavor, which is not the case. As I said, humanity has survived without money for many thousands of years longer than we have had money. And it is really at one point in time after the flood when I believe the Annunaki realized that money was not, that they could no longer control humanity around the world through physical slavery and whips and chains and, the threat of violence and so forth, that they came up with the concept of money. And this is when the guys in Zeitgeist...
Confucianism, I like the sound of it, a world without money. It just sounds like, it reminds me of... Are you familiar with the creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry?
Yeah, of course. I actually refer to Star Trek quite often because it seems like pretty much everything that we've been seeing in Star Trek for 50 years now is very close to the truth, if not actually, the truth about the universe and all things in it.
I think that the kind of social structure that you're advocating with Ubuntu, it's a wonderful thing. It seems that people would need to be virtuous. It seems that altruism would need to be one of the virtues that would be championed in that kind of social structure. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. But, the thing is that we might think that altruism and virtuous kind of living is something alien to human society today, but that is not really true. And this is what I believe to be so critical about the book that I'm about to release, because it actually highlights how money taints and disturbs our lives in every possible way, how it affects every crack and crevice in the fabric of society, how it infiltrates and influences everything we do in ways that we can't even imagine until we really start looking at it with a very strong magnifying glass and we realize the depths to which this control of money goes. So, you might think that people would have to change completely. Well, it's really not people that need to change. It's people will change automatically once you remove money from the system. It's the money that makes people behave in specific ways. In fact, it's the money that makes people make, crazy statements like human nature won't allow people to live in harmony together. That's an insane statement to make, from a position of a capitalistic society where you are making value calls and value judgments on people based on the capture a world without money, which is really the information and the conclusions that I've reached after, the discoveries that we've made here in South Africa regarding the ancient civilizations and, as you mentioned, the vanished, the remains of the Enki's gold mining empire and the presence of the Annunaki, and this huge body of evidence that has been lying buried beneath the soil that has suddenly jumped out and smacked us in the face and said, here it is, here we are. And what I've learned from the past 5 years of research, together with, the previous 25 years or so, or more, 30 years of looking at the origins of humankind and delving into the real depths of that, I guess starting probably with Eric von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods in 1978. That has led me to formulate a whole new understanding of how the ancient civilizations lived, what they did, how they were manipulated and controlled. But the very important thing conclusion that I reached was that they did all this without any money. And that made me really think about how we today as a society are controlled and manipulated absolutely by money, and realize that that is the biggest problem that we have. So the new book is really, I guess, a prototype for what I believe to be a new social structure, and a blueprint presenting some very basic ideas and suggestions as to what we should be doing to remove ourselves and free ourselves from the economic slavery that we find ourselves in.
The idea of Ubuntu, that is so fascinating to me.